Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think everyone in this room probably knows the gentleman on my right, but I will introduce them anyway. Neal Martin of Vinous, Mr. Alex Moreau of Domaine Moreau, this Mr. business partner, Mr. Jason Haynes, and Cyprien Arlaud, here to talk about the 22 vintage. And congratulations everyone on how quickly you clicked to be here. A few people are running late, but this thing was extremely sought after. And it's a sort of a reflection of the excitement over this vintage, which slightly catches us by surprise. We've been doing this for 17 years now, and we're all vintages, but this one seems particularly to have captured his imagination. The format tonight is the four people on my right have chosen a wine each that they think reflects something of the quality of the vintage, and I will leave them to talk about their individual wines and why they chose them. But on the subject of 22 and why it seems to have captured people's imagination, I'm going to launch into Neal, if I may. I'll put you straight on the spot and say, from your perspective, what it is about the vintage that's got people so excited.
I think partly, as you mentioned in your introduction, the surprise, I think, is, I've been doing this for like 25 years now, and I always have a kind of preconception of how the wines are going to be. And I think, especially for 22, I was sort of thinking of that extremely hot summer we had and the wildfires that were in France. So in my head, I was kind of predicting another similar vintage to like the warm seasons, like 1920. And so I was expecting big, ripe, some say turbocharged sort of wines, not quite that, but like, the richer, higher alcohol, low acidity wines, more opulence. And I was totally wrong-footed. And, just from the first day, I was there for like 6 weeks, tasting every day, Saturday, Sunday. And like from the very first tasting, it was the sort of the freshness and the kind of the vibrancy of the wines, which I think, I have to say, you do tend to find it more when I'm tasting in Burgundy than here. It really comes through more there. And I think when the wines will be in bottle, you'll see it sort of come back a bit more, but especially for Pinot Noir. But that's sort of, it's not a return to classic Burgundy, but it's certainly sort of gone in that kind of, almost like a combination of the two. So it's like a kind of modern vintage, but without the high alcohol levels that we've sort of seen in recent years. And I definitely think that especially Pinot Noir is at its optimal when it's between that kind of 12.5 to the low 13s. That's where I like to drink my Pinot Noir. It's not that I dislike all the wines that are higher than that, but in order to kind of show the terroir, the sheer sort of drinkability and that elusive concept of pinotet, which I really like. That's what I look for. I want my Burgundy to shout. I want it to sing Pinot Noir. And I think that the 22 vintage does that, and it was something that, for whites and for the reds, that I completely wasn't expecting. So I had to sort of, I always treat it as a blank slate when I go to Burgundy. But by the time I left after 6 weeks, I had a completely different idea in my head and then wrote it down. And so I think it's a fantastic vintage. And in my career, one of the most pleasurable vintages I've certainly tasted in 25 years.
Thank you, Neal. I've got a few questions from people they've given me in advance, and some of them which Neal's touched on, which we can go into more detail. Just to say, please interrupt at any point. Happy to have more discussion than a just speech at you. So just stick your hand up and we'll go. But we'll launch into the first wine, which I think is the pick of Mr. Alex Moreau, the Maltois. Over to you. Your thoughts on the Maltois and why you chose it, and your thoughts on the 22.
So I wanted to show this terroir because I think it reflects a lot what I want to do. I always like to say what I'm looking for into the wine is a wine is made to be drunk and not only taste it. So it's always important for me to focus with a balance of the wine. And when you've got a vintage with some extreme weather, like Neal just said, it's always more challenging to get what you want to do. But now with the experience, because don't forget, we've got 22 now, but this sort of warm vintage starts since many years now, but we can say more and more since 2015, because we have 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, and 23 again. So I think the target for me and for us will be to try to adapt our winemaking and decision to make sure we won't change our style, to make sure the style I want to make will stay in the bottle. So means picking dates is very, very important. It's always been like that, very, very important. But when you see a vintage like 22, don't forget it's my second earliest vintage I have seen. We started the whites the 25th of August. So don't forget, when we pick grapes in August, your grapes is exposed with the sun of summer and not a sun of autumn. It means more temperature and more light per day, because if you pick the 25th of September or 25th of August, you've got at least 1 hour of light more per day. So it means what we have seen since I'm making wine. It's funny to be here with Cyprien because we started together 25 years ago. And what we have seen during the last 20 days, we thought we were okay, but now we have to adapt again our winemaking to make sure, again, our style stay like that. And because when you go close to your picking date, in the past, we knew we had about 1 week the window to pick your grapes, and it will be done, with safe, safe risk. Now, if we want to do the same thing, we have to make sure everything will be done in few days. It means you need your team ready. You need to be your winery, your cellar ready to go, because if you miss this window, it will become much more narrow and narrow. You will make a wine, but totally different of what I want to make. And 22 I'm very happy with the result of today, but I have to say, during harvest, I was quite anxious because the weather was very warm, and I thought, okay, we will test more the vintage before the terroir. And during the aging process, very fast we saw, okay, the fruit was clean, no botrytis, no disease, not overripe fruit, good balance with acidity. Everything was there to make a good vintage, but we never knew, when you've got this amount of sun and heat who come during a harvest with a high temperature, you know what you get, but you cannot guess honestly what will be the style of the vintage. I'm happy 15 months after with the result, and we have decided to show this terroir of Maltroit because I think Maltroit is a terroir central of Chassagne-Montrachet, and I can give you a good example of what can be done is this vintage, because Maltroit has got always this, I like to say that this character where we test this wine 2 times. The first part seems to have richness and volume into the wine, and with always a good fresh finish, which is a characteristic of this terroir of La Maltroit. And I think you've got it now. So this is not bottled yet. We are right in the aging process, and it will be bottled, I think, around this spring. I don't know yet. Voilà.
Can I ask one point? We had a conversation earlier. We talked about the warmth of the vintage. I think when we all think of that, we picture the middle of summer and the sun shining. You brought out the point that the conditions in winter have become so important. Could I ask you to say a couple of points on that?
Yes, because there is two things. There is the weather we've got during the summer, but in the other hand, we've got less and less cold, strong winter. And it's a very important point because it makes the vineyard start to grow a little bit earlier. It means we are much more exposed during end of spring or beginning of May with a frost potential. It's always been like that. End of May, end of April, beginning of May, always been, my dad said, it always been like that. But the problem is today, instead to have just the growing season start, we could have shoots of vine like that, and much more sensitive with the frost. And because these vineyards start to grow between 2 and 3 weeks earlier, when the flowering is done, we knew it's going to be an early harvest again. So it's not only the summer who makes our early picking date. It's the summer for sure, but it's as well the vineyard start to is life too early for me.
Thank you. Second wine we're talking about is Jason's pick, which is Prozo Premier Cru Merceau from Jobba, which we'll have in front of you. Jason is sort of more famous for his poker face and his flat way of delivering things and getting overexcited and doing Irish jigs. But he has gone on record this year of saying, I think, I'll embarrass Jason, it's probably 30 years he's been tasting Burgundy in barrel for. And he's gone on to say that this year, tasting from barrel, he tasted some of the most exciting wines he's ever tasted. So I'm interested to hear some enthusiasm from Jason.
Absolutely. It's my middle name. Apologies for the voice. It's a little croaky after all the chat today. Well, firstly, I'd like to echo what Neal said. I went and did just a couple of weeks in June to get a pre-assessment of the vintage, a feeling for it more than really detailed analysis of the wines, which we tend to do in October and November. And I was completely shocked by what I tasted. I was not expecting wines of such vivacity, typicity, tension, energy. I mean, it was crazy. The notes were pretty much the same in so many domains. I mean, it was great, but it was not what I was expecting. So that was a real eye opener. And I think, for me, I would say two things. Just that of the recent warm vintages, this is the most Burgundian one that's been made. If you look at 15, 18, 19, 20, this probably tastes more of Pinot and Chardonnay than any of those. I think there's more terroir, typicity. There's a purity of fruit and a sort of saline definition, which is lovely. And I think the other important thing that shows is that the change that winemakers have made in not just how they work in the vineyards, but also in the cellars. It's taken them a few years, but they've now got to grips with these warm vintages. Rather than almost trying to fight against them, they've actually embraced it. And so, okay, well, it looks like it's here to stay. So let's work out how we're going to make a success of these vintages. And I think they really have. I could not be more impressed with the wines, and I think some people really did a great job. I chose this wine not because I made it, because obviously I didn't, but sadly. But Antoine, I think, really produced a very fine selection of 2022s. We discussed quite a lot his changes he's made since 2015, which Alex as well perhaps notes as a turning point. where he's done a lot more work with the lees to bring more freshness to the wines. I mean, here in the Poroso, the level of acidity isn't really, really high. The pHs are not really, really low, but the wine has a very clear drive and freshness to it. It's on the slightly higher part of Poroso, but the stoniness of the terroir comes through, and that gives it a sort of mouth-watering tautness, I think. The salinity comes through, the citrusiness that I always associate with Poroso is very much there. Like a lot of people, he's perhaps downplayed the oak in recent years, warmer years. Almost the warmer years, if you use too much new oak, I think you're almost double egging the wine. So just easing off the new oak a little bit has helped, and I think most people have done that. I mean, two people either side of me would know much better than myself. So that's the reason I've chosen this. Sorry if one or two of your my glass is a little bit perfumed at the beginning. That blows away after you rinse it around a bit. But yeah, citrusy, full of energy. This is it's not yet bottled. Antoine likes to give his wines a second winter. We were saying this is becoming a much more common practice again in Burgundy. So 12 months in barrel, then move 6 months further aging in stainless steel. And I think that's just helping to add extra vibrancy to the wines. So I think this is a really nice example of the vintage. I think it should age very well, but there is enough richness. I mean, we mustn't forget it was a warm vintage, so there is good ripeness there. But there's that energy and drive that gives it both length and complexity, and should give it ageability as well, I think.
Thank you. I mean, one thing you've touched on there, adapting to conditions for winemakers, brings a question I was asked earlier to put to Alex and Cyprien. If you were thrown these conditions 20, 25 years ago as very young men, could you have made wines? 10 years ago, could you have made wines of this quality?
I think probably not. Because again, we have to adjust. And as Jason said, more and more we've got a second winter of aging, which is very, very important. For my case, for example, this wine, the Chassagne Premier Cru Maltroit, I do only natural yeast fermentation, so the alcoholic fermentation process can be very, very long in my place, many months. And I like to leave the wine settle in tank for a little while, because when you've got a natural yeast fermentation, you've got barrels to barrels with a certain difference of evolution, barrels by barrel. So that's for sure a longer time on lees makes the wine, for my opinion, much fresher.
Cyprien, may I ask in your youth, could you have made wines of this quality given these conditions?
So I will say as a wine grower, I will talk about my experience. When you start, you don't know which kind of wine you want to make. So you're more trying to adapt to what's happening, what's going on, and maybe to try to follow some other style of wine, the fashion wine, and you think, okay, if it's the kind of wine who pleased most of the consumer or wine lovers, we try to do this kind of wine. And very quickly, and I think it's the same with Alex, for my experience, I understood after 5 vintages, then Burgundy has something very, very subtle, will oblige you to understand properly what you're doing, to be very sensitive, because Burgundy is not the good place to make the kind of wine you want to make. Burgundy will show you the way. So it's very interesting because we've been in 25 different vintages. We've been through some vintages like 2003, 20, 22. We pick in August, was very, very early picking, but we also experimented some vintages like 13, 2008, 98. They were very late picking in October. So it's a real luck. In fact, this what's happening with the climate offer us the possibility in the last 30 years to see all the possibility of Burgundy. And the great thing is when you have the luck to be able to pick grapes in October, but also in August. They were not having this kind of experiences 30 years ago. We've done it. We've done it because we were obliged to adapt. And it makes you understand that Burgundy can be just, can be balanced, can be Burgundy, whatever the weather, if you're awake, if you adapt, if you're sensitive, and if you love what you're doing. And we've been going through the last 25 vintages with the same passion and with the same idea to make a good wine. And when you want to do that, of course, 25 years ago, we won't do those wines. Probably because we improve, we became more competitor to understand what's happening with the weather and the nature and what we're having in Burgundy. And I will say, for my part, I will never make the wine I've done in 25 years ago. So what is the exact reason? Sometimes it's just because the vine, they're getting older.
And the winemakers.
And the winemakers too, but you can also say the wine is becoming better or more precise or more expressive because the vine, they're just 25 years old, older, and they make a better wine. That's it.
Before we move on to that, anyone questions on the whites or anything I can?
When you talk about adaptation, I'm sure it's in both in the vineyard and in the shade, in viticulture and in winemaking. But do you think now, with the climate change, there's more adaptation in the field, in the shade? How do you kind of think of what are the pressures of your adaptation? Where do you find in the process?
I think both.
Yeah, both. And the climate change is happening also in the cellars. The cellars, we're getting a warmer winter, so we drier cellars. So it's the lees, the evolution of the wine with the lees, the oxidation of the wine in the barrel, the humidity in the cellar. So now we control more the humidity. We look more for we always been looking for the temperature, but we were following the natural temperature and humidity of the cellars. Now things are changing. So it's true for the day of picking. It's true in the cellar. It's true in the field. We have to spray sometime in the night to don't burn the vines with the sulfur. One thing is very interesting. The vines also adapt. Have changed the way the vines, the plant, with the weather. One thing is about the water. We were not thinking about irrigation, natural irrigation in the past. Now, it's becoming a very important thing. The dryness in the air, and early in the morning, we are very continental region, so we can have the dew, the rosé, on the leaves, and I've seen the vines. They were not sensitive to it because the water was there. Doesn't need the dew. But now, when we have a vintage like 22, we have a long period of dry weather, and the dew is coming. The vines take it, need it. So it's very interesting to see also how the vines, the nature adapt. We do in the cellar, in the field, in the winery, and also the vines also adapt. It's very interesting.
Moving on to the reds then. Neal, your choice is Amélie Berthaud's Fixin Arlaud. If I could ask you to say a few words about that. And at the same time, possibly you and Jason might be in the best perspective to comment on the vintage. Is there any area you would highlight? Any village? Is it Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune? Any village you think is overperformed in this vintage or not?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so Fixin is the sort of, it's a sort of weak link in the Côte de Nuit. I don't know, sort of, but it's the one appellation where I think there was a lot of potential, and hasn't realized it yet, with the exception of what Amelie's doing here. And I think, you know, if you ask a lot of people that do my job, you know, how many domains did you visit in Fisa? It's either 0 or Amelie. They're the two sort of, you know. So, and that's, I think it's just because it just needs a little more time. I think it will happen. Hasn't quite happened yet, but I can see maybe in 10 years, I think Fisa, you know, it's sandwiched between, you know, Gevry and Marsanne. Gevry has so many fantastic groves and amazing terroir. And Marsanne is quite sort of dynamic, and you've got the sort of the alligator movement up there, and then Fisan's sort of in between, and you drive through the village and it's like you don't see anybody. You know, does anybody live here? But when I first visited Amélie, I thought, oh, finally, there's a reason to go to Fisan, because you could obviously see that the quality was just a level above what everybody else is doing, and I still think it's a level above what everybody else is doing, and I do hope I don't have to say that in a few years' time. Yeah, I mean, Les Arvalets are sort of, you know, this does show the potential of Fisan. In a way, it's sort of like the style is sort of in between sort of Gevry and Marsanne, maybe a little bit more Marsanne than Gevry, I think. But Les Arvalets is sort of a great one, maybe with the best terroir in Fisan. I think this wine, if I remember, I think is about 50% stems in this. I could be wrong, but I think it's 50%. And that's another sort of aspect of the 22 vintage, is the use of whole bunches and stems and the role they play. Maybe that's the big difference when we were talking about 20 years ago. There's a lot more producers now that are using stems, and I would add to that, using stems cleverly, because the only way you can't learn about using stems in a university. You have to do it, and you have to learn each vintage, right? You know, these stems are fully lignified, I can use that, and how much are you going to use? You know, it's every year is totally different, and it can catch even the most experienced winemakers out, you know. So, and even with, I think when I reviewed this wine, I said, oh, I might have used a little bit less stems maybe, and I can still, like, you know, when I sort of smell the wine now, I can still tell. I think they're less pronounced than when I tasted them in November. But so maybe they're sort of integrating nicely now. And I think that's for me, I mean, I probably go a little bit more towards Pinot Noir with stems, because I like the kind of the unpredictability that they add to a wine. So as the wines age, I think wines with higher stem addition can turn into something really complex and interesting. It's never guaranteed, but it's a kind of trend that I personally really like in Pinot Noir. At the same time, you've got to be super careful, because it can reduce your acidity. So if you've got like warm vintages, the last thing you want to do is reduce the acidity even more, but the stems add a kind of freshness sensation. So you have these two kind of contradictory sort of sensory perceptions. But for me, they sort of do tend to add more freshness, and I do think they work really well in warmer vintages, partly because your stems are fully lignified, and partly just because they just give this extra dimension away from the sort of forward fruit or that kind of opulence. And I think this wine has that, so it sort of contains the opulence of the vintage and that you get from Fisan, but at the same time there's these kind of stems and Amelie's way of winemaking that is just like pulling it back, and like, as we said, retaining that sense of Pinot Noir, and as Jason said, that Burgundian style that I sort of really love. So, but I think it's a really lovely wine, and I can see maybe it will get better and better in bottle as well. I mean, and you said the other part was the...
And the second point was other villages. Would you highlight anywhere in particular in 22?
I would say in the Côte de Beaune, as I've written a lot recently, I think Chassagne is really exciting because there's just so many great winemakers there, and it's so dynamic, and one sitting next to me, of course. But it's like there's every year there's more people I sort of have to see, and there's a lot of young winemakers coming through, and there's a lot of interaction, and so it's a really exciting. Chassagne was always sort of like if you can't afford Pellini, then you have a Chassagne. And I don't think that's the case. I love drinking Chassagne, and I put it for me, the same level as Puligny. And so some people wouldn't, but I think I love what's going on down there at the moment. And I love Savigny-le Bon. In fact, I'd say Savigny-le Bon and Pernin-Vergelès as well. I think those two, again, a little bit, they were always the underdogs in the past, a little bit rustic wines. Savigny was always, well, you know, you can't get the fruit completely ripe. You have to have a very, very hot vintage, and then you have a decent wine. Of course, global warming's played into its hands. And again, I think another thing that's changed in the last 4 or 5 years is more really good winemakers sort of coming through there now. And 22, I loved Savigny. And Pernin-Vergelès, that's like, if I go to a restaurant and, you know, I can't afford all these top wines, you know, but I look at Pernin-Vergelès and there's some absolutely fantastic wines there. And I think those two kind of are really sort of coming through in 22 really nicely, and that's probably, you know, and if I had lots of money, Gevrey-Chambertin, I think is...
Is that, again, the producers there, or is that
I
climate?
think it's producers. I would say, I think in 22, if there was a little bit more inconsistency because of we haven't talked about it yet, but the unbelievable torrential downpours they had that kind of focused on Gevrey-Chambertin in particular. I mean, I think I used the word biblical in my report, and that wasn't an exaggeration. I mean, they'd never seen, they had so much, you know, people said they had so much rain that the weather, what's it called, the weather measurements couldn't record how much rain was falling because it was they'd just never seen it before. So I think that's led to a little bit more inconsistency in Gevrey than other places, but it's always a strong appellation.
Jason, would you add anything to that?
I would add, and Pernod, I agree, but I would say both whites and reds. I think Pernod, some of the Pernod whites, some of the mini Corton Charlemagnes, if you like, they're out there. The Premier Cru Pernod whites are delicious. And then I think, extending on what Neal said there, those appellations that in the past have just struggled to get fully phenolic, it's quite hard to say, phenolically ripe, in cooler vintages have really flourished in 22. So there's some wonderful Pommars, that's for sure. Nuits, some parts of Nuits, perhaps more on the southern side than the Vaune side, I think has done especially well. Clos Vougeot is probably as aromatic a set of wines as you'll ever taste, I think, in 22. And if we want a smaller appellation, Aussy-Duresse. I think the reds have they've got ripe, and the whites, I think it's almost, I'm describing it as the new Meursault. When I used to go and visit a couple of people in OC, you'd leave Meursault in the mornings, and the temperature would drop by about 5 degrees within a mile. It was extraordinary. There really is a microclimate there. Now, that's exactly where you want to be in these warm climates. So it retains that freshness that it always had, but it's just got a little bit more richness on the mid-palate. So there's still a lot of value to be had there. So evenings like this is probably a bad idea, because all the growers are going to find out that we're saying, put the prices up of Aussy-Duresse. But there is some really nice things coming out of that appellation, I think. And again, it helps that there's new, more ambitious winemakers in all these areas who can see the potential and not just doing what their fathers did. They're standing back, reflecting, saying, okay, well, I think we can really do something better than we've ever done here before.
Thank you. Questions? Brings us on to Cyprien. Final wine we're looking at tonight is Cyprien's Moët Saint-Denis Premier Cru Chezot. If I ask Cyprien to say a few words about that, and also at the same time something was asked, famously biodynamic farming has been central to your philosophy for quite a while now. In the context of 22, beneficial, neutral, to be farming biodynamically? Probably.
It's never easy to say that one specific technique, kind of farming, will make the difference. But one thing is that's for sure, for being in this approach on the estate for more than 15 years, it makes me understood, like I was saying in the introduction, probably a better understanding of each clima. And it's very important with what we're going through now. As Alex said, vintages, they're becoming warmer, drier, so they're more extreme condition for the vineyards. So where are the roots is very important. We need vineyards with deeper roots. We need soil, they're very alive, because if we get, like happens in Gevrey, suddenly after months of dry weather, a big amount of rain, if your soil doesn't have the good texture, is not alive, it won't catch all the rain. And we need those rain. It's becoming rare, but if it's coming, we're still lucky. We are still have storms, and we need to catch this rain. So you need a very good efficiency of the soil, of the plant, and also the connection with the wine growers and the timing to be at the right place at the right time, and to be quick, to be, as you say, Alex, the windows, they're becoming shorter. So we have to be very reactive. And then, that's very interesting, because I was always saying that I was feeling more comfortable with cooler vintages to express the style of wine I like and to express Burgundy. But to be honest, 19 changed my mind, because I was also finding in the 19 a nice expression of Burgundy, and definitely 22 make me very pleased, because it's a very extreme warm vintage and it's full Burgundy for me. And I love when Neal talk about pinoté, because when we say about a wine, c'est pinot, it's not only the fact that the wine is showing the Pinot Noir. In fact, the term we're using in Burgundy when we say this wine pinot is really showing where it's coming from. Un Chambol qui pinote, it's smelling Chambol, it's tasting Chambol. And 22, against everything we thought, as you say, every logic we had, we discover, probably because we are still adapting, since 15, the vineyards as well, we're more precise, we discover that we're still able to make Burgundy wines with climate change. And for me, the biodynamic and all the precise understanding approach in the field and in the winery as well have a huge importance, that's for sure. Because we need consistent vineyards, very healthy, and it's the same for the team and for the people. So it helps a lot with this kind of vintages to express each climat. And I choose the Moret Premier Cru Haut Chauzeau. It's one of the 21 Premier Cru of Moret. So in Moret Saint-Denis, many Premier Cru, there's no one is very known more than the others. So how can you make a Premier Cru of Moret will show his own character in such short distance, very tiny appellation like Moret? Chauzeau can taste as Chaffaux, can taste as the 20 others. But Chauzeau, there's no earth, it's very thin piece of earth, it's limestone underneath, and it's all the combination of this precision will show in the wine a nice ripeness of the Pinot Noir with a nice freshness as well, and silky tannins. For me, it's one thing I really love with the 22, and I want to show with the Moret Premier Cru Haut Chauzeau. Moret Saint-Denis is always not been known to make wine with elegant tannins. Okay, we know Vaughan, we know Chambol, but I wanted to show with this wine, even there's no earth, a big heat and dry vintage, you can have a nice silkiness in the wine, which we're looking for. We want everything. We want a wine we show his own personality when it's young, and we want a wine will age properly. So we work in this way. Whatever if the weather is very extreme, and it's becoming more and more extreme, and we have to find the way to reduce the undulation. With this kind of vintage, it can be the weather is like that, and we want to make a wine is like that. And it's the farming is important, and many other things.
Thank you. Hello, Sam.
I was going to ask about stems in this one.
There's more than 1/3 of stems.
More than 1/3?
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask about pH in 22, because it is higher, especially perhaps the winemaker. Are you worried about pH levels being up, potentially affecting ageability, making wines more difficult to make?
I will answer first. I will let you answer for the white. Is a very good question, but for the red, we learn the same time at the wine college, and we were learning about the importance of the pH. It's an important thing, but the test is very important. So we can see now some wines with higher pH, but will show more freshness. That's the way we have to. The alcohol can be a bit higher. So there's other way to manage to show the wine also bright and fresh. We look after the pH, but it's more you go in this work, and more you understand that it's much more complex than just certain measure as pH can be.
Yeah, very true. And I think today it's after 20-25 years of experience, it's even more true. And I don't believe too much when the wine is done itself. It's not true. I mean, today we have to think about different things, control things, as Cyprien said, pH, but it's not only pH. But the thing is, if pH go a little bit higher, we have to pay attention about the wine, because it's become much more sensitive with many things. Biologically, bacteria, those kind of things. So it's not like, okay, I pick the right date and let's see, it will be done easily. No, it's not true. I don't think so. You have to be very precise and clean in any time, in barrels and bottling. I think because the wine are becoming more and more sensitive with potential trouble.
I'm mindful the tasting next door is getting extremely busy, so I think we should probably call it there. I've 3 thank yous on behalf of Gareth, Jason, and myself. Thank you for everyone here for listening. Huge thank you to Neal for taking part. And 2 winemakers, I think 17 years ago was our first Burgundy en primeur offering, and you were 2 of the very first who gave us an allocation. We were very grateful then, and we remain extremely grateful. So, thank you.